Hey, it's a little windy out here today, and I tried to find somewhere that's kind of sheltered from the wind, but if the wind kicks up, it could get a little noisy with all the trees, so just bear with me. And the topic that I want to talk about today is a really important one. I want to talk about covenants. And my last video, I talked about how the book of Joshua is the story of promises fulfilled. But really, that's the story of the entire Bible. It's all about covenants from start to finish, the giving of covenants and the fulfillment of covenants. And I'm reading from Joshua 22, verses 1 through 6. Then Joshua called the Reubenites, the Gadites, and half the tribe of Manasseh, and said to them, "You have kept all that Moses, the servant of Yahweh, commanded you, and have obeyed my voice in all that I commanded you. You have not left your brother in these many days, up to this day, but have kept the charge of the commandment of Yahweh your God. And now Yahweh your God has given rest to your brethren, as he promised them. Now therefore return and go to your tents and to the land of your possession, which Moses the servant of Yahweh gave you on the other side of the Jordan. But take careful heed to do the commandments and the law which Moses the servant of Yahweh commanded you, to love Yahweh your God, to walk in all his ways, to keep his commandments, to hold fast to him, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul." So Joshua blessed them and sent them away, and they went to their tents. The Bible is full of covenants from start to end. There's a covenant with Eve, with Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. There's a covenant with Aaron, with the tribe of the Levites. A covenant with the people of Gibeon, with Rahab, with David. Just covenant after covenant, that mostly between God and his people, but also between individual people. And here, the people of Israel had come into the land of Canaan. They had a new order. Instead of moving from place to place, the tabernacle was going to be set in a single place. All of the people would come there 3 times a year. Instead of wandering in the desert, they were going to be settling into farms and cities. They had a new kind of leadership. Instead of a single person in charge, they would have a judge in the priesthood and judges in all of their cities and towns. The manna stopped. It was a whole new kind of existence. But the covenants that God made with them in the wilderness at Sinai and the ones before that were still in place. Even though they had new leadership and a new way of life and new covenants, the old covenant was still in place, and they were still supposed to keep the law of Moses. Let me read one of the favorites when people talk about covenants in the New Testament, from Galatians 3, verses 15 through 17. "Brethren, I speak in the manner of men, though it is only a man's covenant, yet if it is confirmed, no one annuls or adds to it. Now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. He does not say, and to seeds, as of many, but as of one, and to your seed, who is Christ. And this I say, that the law, which was 430 years later, cannot annul the covenant that was confirmed before by God in Christ, that it should make the promise of no effect." So God made the covenant with Abraham that promised the Messiah 400 years before the covenant at Sinai. But the covenant at Sinai cannot annul the covenant that came before. And any covenant made after that one, after the one at Sinai, cannot annul the covenant at Sinai. No covenant, once it's made, can ever be annulled. The best, well, not the best, that's a good thing. There's no bad side to that. But like the writer of Hebrews points out, if a covenant has the same provisions as an older one, it makes the old one obsolete. It doesn't make the provisions of the old covenant obsolete because they are included in the new one. But if you have something new that contains all of the same things as something old, but just newer, well, of course, the old one is obsolete. It doesn't go away. It just covers the exact same territory as the new one. So if you keep the new one, you are also keeping the old one. If a newer covenant has better promises, superior promises, than an older covenant, then the newer one makes the older one to fade away. It's like the difference between the sun and the moon. When the sun rises, the moon doesn't cease to exist. It just fades away because the sun is so much brighter than the moon and the stars and the planets. We can't see them anymore because the sun outshines them. They're still there. Now, let me read to you another passage from Jeremiah. This is the passage, the classic passage, that defines the new covenant. Jeremiah chapter 31, verses 31 through 37. Behold, the days are coming, says Yahweh, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt. My covenant which they broke, though I was a husband to them, says Yahweh. But this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, says Yahweh. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. No more shall every man teach his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, Know Yahweh, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them, says Yahweh. For I will forgive their iniquity, and their sin I will remember no more. Thus says Yahweh, who gives the sun for a light by day, the ordinance of the moon and the stars for a light by night, who disturbs the sea and its waves roar. Yahweh of hosts is his name. If those ordinances, the ones about the moon and the stars, depart from before me, says Yahweh, then the seed of Israel shall also cease from being a nation before me forever. Thus says Yahweh, if heaven above can be measured and the foundations of the earth searched out beneath, I will also cast off all the seed of Israel for all that they have done, says Yahweh. Yeshua talks about this passage. He gave a sermon in which he referenced it directly. Let's go to Matthew chapter 5. Now, before I read this, I want to point out three distinct characteristics of the new covenant as defined in Jeremiah 31. First, the new covenant is only with the house of Israel and Judah. It is only made with the people of Israel, nobody else. So if you want to be part of the new covenant, you have to become part of the house of Israel. Two, in the new covenant, the law is written on our hearts. This isn't a new law. It's the same law of God that we've always had, that was codified at Sinai. And number three, the nation of Israel will continue as a people as long as heaven and earth exist. If heaven and earth stop existing, if somehow we manage to measure the entirety of heaven and search out everything inside the earth. Now remember that this is written in the context of ancient Israel, when telescopes and sonar, things like that didn't exist. Only if those things can be searched out by a man will God's covenant with Israel cease to exist. So let me read what Yeshua said in Matthew chapter 5, verses 16 through 19. And I'm including verse 16 here where most people don't, because verse 17 flows from 16. Those two should never be separated. They're part of the same statement. So starting in verse 16. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. Do not think that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For assuredly I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, not one jot or one tittle will by no means pass from the law till all is fulfilled. Whoever therefore breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches men so, shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does and teaches them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. This was a direct reference to the prophecy of Jeremiah in Jeremiah 31, where it spoke about heaven and earth. And if these things ever pass away, then God's covenant at Sinai will also pass away, and God's covenant with the people of Israel will pass away. Remember, Jeremiah also talked about the least and the greatest in the kingdom. And what did he say about them? They will all know God and his law, everyone. And here Yeshua is saying that if anyone breaks God's commandments and teaches others to do so, they will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But even in the new covenant, God will write his law on those people's hearts, so they will have no excuse. As I started out, the Bible is a book of covenants from start to finish. It's the story of covenants made and kept. And no new covenant ever replaces an older covenant. David's covenant didn't replace the new covenant of Jeremiah. Jeremiah's covenant didn't replace the covenant with Aaron and his sons. The covenant with Aaron didn't replace the covenant at Sinai, and Sinai didn't replace the covenant with Abraham that promised the Messiah. So when people talk about we're under the new covenant now and not the old covenant, well, they're talking about the 10 Commandments and all of God's law that Yeshua and Moses and Jeremiah and Joshua all said would never pass away. So they're putting themselves at odds with all of God's prophets, and even with the Messiah himself. God's law will never pass away so long as heaven and earth exist. This is Jay Carper from American Torah. Be blessed.